Hello and welcome to the SDLP's launch of its 4 Principles for Economic Recovery. I'm Paul Gosling and I have with me Matthew O'Toole, the SDLP's finance spokesperson and MLA for South Belfast, and Sinéad McLaughlin, Foyle MLA and the SDLP's economy spokesperson. Matthew, perhaps you could head off by explaining the thinking behind the SDLP's proposal of these 4 principles for economic recovery.
Thanks, Paul. Well, I think the key thing from our perspective is that we know we face a really acute short-term economic hit as a result of COVID-19. We know it's going to be a very difficult few months ahead. The COVID-19 experience has, however, illustrated or thrown into stark relief some of the existing weaknesses in the Northern Ireland economy, and it's probably also created some new ones. But it's also highlighted some areas for potential where we can focus our minds in terms of recovery. So we think now is the right time to think about the principles that we want to underpin our recovery in the long term, but not just our recovery, how we want our economy to look in the years to come. And I suppose a big part of the reason for starting with 4 principles, and they are quite high level principles, is not because we think this is a detailed manifesto or a granular set of policy prescriptions for every area of the Northern Ireland economy, but really an opportunity to start a discussion and to force the agenda a little bit in the Northern Ireland economic debate about the kinds of things we should be thinking about and addressing, some of which have been issues for a very long time, but we haven't addressed them up to now.
Do you want to just list those core 4 principles?
Yeah, so 4 principles are, first of all, a new deal for young people. What's a new deal for young people? Well, it's a range of things. I think we know, unfortunately and tragically, that young people tend to be the hardest hit in every economic downturn. They have already been, in several connected ways, hit hard by the COVID-19 crisis. For young people at school, they've been taken out of school. For young people at university, their university experience has been disrupted, and those who are graduating are going to enter into a very difficult jobs market. Those who are leaving further education in school and not going on to higher education, trying to get into the jobs market either via an apprenticeship or via a direct employment, are facing a really chilly jobs market in every sector, particularly acute in some sectors. So it's a really difficult time for young people. But let's be honest, young people in Northern Ireland specifically, and this generation in general, have already had a pretty raw deal. There was their circumstances post the economic crash in 2008 have not, their prospects as a generation, or probably a couple of generations, have not recovered, not been dealt with in the way that economy should have done post 2008. It's still the housing market is still too chilly. In relation to Northern Ireland, we still have this crisis of exporting too many of our young people at one end of the educational scale, and at the other end, outcomes are very, very poor, particularly from kids.
And what are the other 3 core principles, Matthew?
The other 3 core principles, thank you for nudging me, Paul, are what we call the new localism, which is really a connected set of principles around how we transform the way we live and work. Lots of people have been working from home. They've also been seeing the value of, for example, local and independent retail, but they've also been seeing the value of cycling, of having more livable communities. And that new localism is connected to how people work in the future, but also how some of our market towns and our rural areas can thrive in the future, because it might be that there are possibilities for more remote working for people who perhaps have a nominal desk in Belfast or even in London or Dublin, but there they can largely work from home in a rural area, whether that's west of the Bann or another more rural area of Northern Ireland. But that brings me on to the next principle, which is what we call the new connectivity. And that new connectivity in relation to faster broadband for those areas will be critical to delivering the kinds of economic opportunities for those people in more rural areas to take advantage of new home working opportunities, new remote working opportunities. That in turn could help those market towns, those rural parts of Northern Ireland thrive in a way that they haven't. That's a story that could be replicated in other parts of the world, but we obviously have a particular set of challenges around regional inequality in this part of the world, particularly in relation to the northwest and west of the band generally. So, but it's not just about broadband, it's not just about telephony, if you like, it's also about transport connectivity, how we connect across this island. We know we've got an abysmal and fairly tragic lack of connectivity across this island. Our party's been thinking about how we focus on building all island connectivity. We're working closely with the new Irish government on hopefully delivering high-speed rail across the island. That's not going to happen immediately, but it's something that we're committed to. And lastly, the last principle are really new powers. In different ways, these have been talked about for a long time in relation to the Northern Ireland economy, but never delivered on. But we need new powers to think about how we invest in our economy. I've just mentioned infrastructure. That involves capital spending, investment in our economy. We've had far too little investment in our economy. Successive Northern Ireland executives have struggled to properly spend capital funding on things that will improve our productivity and improve the life chances of our young people. Well, we need new powers to invest that money, to spend it more quickly, and also, if necessary, to borrow on a discretionary basis, and to borrow more money to invest in, for example, high-speed rail infrastructure across Northern Ireland or across this island, and other forms of investment. So those are the four principles.
Yeah, and we'll come back to some more detail on that in a moment. Thanks, Matthew. Sinead, the first of those four principles is what you call a new deal for young people. Can you explain a bit more detail about why you're suggesting that and what you think that would mean in practice?
Well, I think Matthew outlined it very clearly there. Our young people it's our future. So it's very important that we ensure that, particularly post-COVID, that our young people come out of this and are supported. So we want to see investment in skills, we want to see investment in higher education, we want to see investment in apprenticeships and training programs to ensure that we prepare our young people for the future, and so that they can get on the career ladder and the job market. We do know that our economy is going to suffer very deeply, and we're coming into the last quarter of the year, and we're going to see major unemployment figures, probably the likes that we've never seen before in Northern Ireland, and that is going to disproportionately impact on our young people, and it's going to disproportionately impact in the sectors where they quite often get their work, within the hospitality, within tourism, within retail sector as well. So we want to ensure that, you know, government policy, legislation is facing towards them and supporting them at their moment of need. You know, this is a crisis, obviously a health crisis, but it's an economic crisis, and I'm concerned for the health and well-being of our young people. So that's why it's the very first of our four principles.
And what does that mean in practice? What will you be doing towards supporting young people?
Well, we've heard from the Economy Ministry yesterday that there's a major investment in apprenticeships, 17.2 million. So we want to make sure that money it goes to where it is needed, and it helps support employers to employ young people and train young people for the future. So our party is working very, very hard with employment bodies and within the executive and within the Department for Economy to ensure that those programs are set up as quickly as possible as our young people are making their choices for their careers and for their futures in the next few months. We're a bit behind. I would have thought that the Department of Economy would have these in place at this point. They haven't, but they're very, very near finalisation, and it will be very welcome to see that happening. We need to support our further education colleges and our higher education colleges in Northern Ireland. As Matthew said, our productivity is very low, and that equates to our levels of skills. So this is a generation that needs supported and helped, and that's why, as I say, it's our number one principle. So every other, policy that we as a party are going to look at, we are going to critique them against these 4 principles. Are we helping the young? Are we improving our local areas, our sub-regions? Are we improving the connectivity? And are we making sure that Northern Ireland has the new powers it requires in order to drive forward the economy and make it inclusive of everyone?
And of course, we've talked there about the apprenticeships, and you've been calling for the expansion of apprenticeship program for a number of months here in response to the crisis. And you've also, over a long period of time, been talking about demand for an increase in the number of places at our universities. Do you want to explain a bit more about that?
Well, higher education, we have the lowest higher education provision out of all of the 4 devolved nations, and particularly here in the Northwest, we have very, very low provision of higher education, and you can see how that impacts quite clearly in the economy. Many of our young people leave Northern Ireland never to return again because they go away to study elsewhere, and that brain drain has had a real impact on our ability to drive and develop the economy in Northern Ireland. So I want to see the maximum student numbers lifted within Northern Ireland, and I want to see investment in higher education places in the Northwest. There's about 27,000 higher education places in the Greater Belfast area, and there is less than 4,000 here in the Northwest, and it is having a real negative impact on our economy. The one thing that we really need within the principles that we're talking about today is sub-regional targets. And we want that to be part of the new powers for Northern Ireland, so that, for example, organisations like InvestMI are actually targeted with ensuring that investment is spread throughout Northern Ireland rather than a concentration in one region within Northern Ireland. And that will raise the productivity throughout the whole of this very small region.
Thanks, Sinead. And that very neatly leads on to the next point, Matthew, which is that you've been very vocal in proposing a new localism. Do you want to say a bit about what that means for communities?
Yeah, Paul, as I said, the new localism is really, I think, about focusing on, well, 2 things. First, one of the things that's been revealed by COVID-19, which is that there's going to be a move towards more home working. Second, people value aspects of their local community, the place they live in, whether that's a city, town, or small village, rural area. They really value things that make that place livable, whether that's sustainable independent retail or green active travel options, or streets that are quiet and livable. These are things that have been revealed in a sense by the COVID-19 crisis, things that we were aware of before but have become particularly acute. We want to see a set of policies that is geared around making those local communities sustainable, but also economically healthy. One of the things we've talked about in relation to the new localism is about how we support independent retail. That's not about having a dig at chain stores or large multiples. They're important to our economy, and they're vital for consumers, and they're big employers. But we know that we need independent retail to make our local communities and local economies thrive. And part of that new localism is ensuring that our policies allow people who want to work from home, and that you will then hopefully help to deliver higher value employment and higher value professionals in areas where, frankly, they haven't had them for a very long time. That in turn will be a positive benefit for those local areas.
And of course, that also, if you're spending into locally owned businesses, that keeps the economy circulating locally with locally generated income spent locally.
Yes, exactly. I think the point about COVID-19 is that it has demonstrated to people the importance of local businesses, frankly, whether those are local hospitality businesses, local retail, or local leisure businesses. Large swathes of those are still closed, and we know it's going to be a very difficult few months and probably years ahead for those businesses as they get through COVID and then deal with the financial aftermath. But at the same time, people in those communities, in a sense, are even more aware of the value of what those businesses do, because they've missed it, because they've seen that for example, the social aspect of local pubs, the community cohesion aspect of those institutions, those small businesses, is really vital to making communities healthy and in touch with one another and supporting one another. And there's another aspect to it which we've talked about in relation to new localism, and that's, for example, local media. We launched earlier this year a suggested rescue plan for local media generally, particularly local newspapers, who had been devastated by the decline in advertising revenue and sales revenue because of people staying in their houses. We delivered in part on that. The executive responded with extra advertising funding, and they're looking at rates measures for those local media. But that's a key example. Local media is critical to making local communities work. If you want a new localism, which we do, a new set of policies which enable local communities to thrive, local businesses to thrive, and people to want to live in those areas, then you also need to have a kind of focal point, a meeting point of information for those local communities, and local media is critical to that. So it's an interlocking web of policies that are designed to focus on local communities and making them thrive.
Thank you, Matthew.
One of the things as well, sorry, I think one of the things as well, you know, what COVID has done in a positive way has made us all fall in love again with our local areas. You know, we've been out walking and we've seen what a beautiful place that we do live in here in Northern Ireland. And this is something that we're considering, you know, a big campaign to try and get people to come back to Northern Ireland. And live here, and you know, they can work for the big companies in London, etc., but they can do it remotely back here in Northern Ireland. That is very, very possible. I know some people that have done that, and we're very, very happy that they actually spent COVID back home in Northern Ireland, in a place where you have such lovely open spaces, and it's very attractive place to be in the best and the worst of times.
Thanks, Sinead. I mean, that takes us on to the next point, which is about connectivity. And you've been very vocal in calling for better broadband connectivity across Northern Ireland in the rural areas, and also in some of the urban areas which have got weak connectivity. But I think connectivity, we have to stress, goes beyond broadband. It also goes beyond road and rail links. I mean, do you want to talk about the spread of the connectivity issues that we're facing?
Yeah, I suppose when you think of connectivity, you think immediately roads, rail, etc. And you know, we do need a significant investment in our road infrastructure, and our rail infrastructure is pretty poor here. But we have to think of connectivity in a much wider vision than just road and rail. We have to think of our broadband connectivity. Digital connectivity is absolutely vital for people to become engaged in the economy. We have seen how bad not having good connectivity and an impact has had, particularly back again in our young people and those in rural areas, particularly those that were trying to teach kids online, and people working from home, where they lived in areas that just had such poor broadband connectivity, and the impact that it had on those families during the time. So that is it's a pretty urgent investment that is required into our digital connections. But connectivity goes wider than that. We have to think of our electricity connectivity. We have to think of our water infrastructure and how that connects. as well into driving our economic recovery. And we have to think of our gas connectivity and our natural gas links and the development of that. But when we're talking about connectivity, it's very, very difficult to talk about it in the sense of 6 counties here in the north. We have to think of our connectivity on an all-island basis, and it just makes sense to do that. And that's not a political statement, it's a practical statement. And I welcome our party and our Minister McLaughlin has set up an all-island commission on infrastructure and connections, and we look forward to seeing responses and the work of the commission in the months to come.
And that leads very neatly into the last point, Matthew, and we're running short of time, so we have to be fairly brief on that. I mean, you've made the point already that we need to reform our institutions, and that actually touches on the things that Sinead was saying there about the need for investment in infrastructure. So fairly briefly, because we're almost out of time, talk a bit, will you, about how you see the need for reform of the powers of the institutions of government of Northern Ireland?
Yes, the institutions in Northern Ireland have, I think, they've done an enormously important job of stabilising our society in the aftermath of the Good Friday Agreement. When they have sat inconsistently, and they have often been distracted by challenges that haven't been the main priorities for people in Northern Ireland. It's now important that we really focus on reforming the economy for the long term. And by the way, that doesn't need to get in the way of anyone's constitutional preference. It certainly won't get in the way of our constitutional preference or our constitutional aspirations. There are deep problematic things about our economy here that need to be dealt with, whatever the constitutional context for Northern Ireland. And we need new powers in our current devolved institutions in order to be able to properly deal with them. We need new levers. One of the challenges we have is that we are dreadful at capital spending. Northern Ireland is both the most unproductive part of these islands and also the worst at spending on infrastructure, capital spending generally. We're bad at value-added investment spending, the kind of thing that boosts our productivity and boosts all of the things we've been talking about in this call. So we need more powers to be able to raise capital spending via borrowing to invest, not to spend on our sort of day-to-day priorities, important though those are. We need new powers because it's clear that the limits that exist at the minute are not sufficient we're not sufficiently investing in our infrastructure and in our connectivity and in our skills and in our young people. And so we need new powers to be able to do that. We need, in a sense, Northern Ireland institutions to step up and take responsibility for actually transforming the local economy. For too long, politicians here, the successive executives, have thought about economic policy as really a succession of favours or interventions for specific sectors. We've tended to bear the impression of the last sector that sat on us, and that really isn't good enough anymore. There needs to be a much more systematic, strategic look at how we transform our economy and the prospects for young people here and young people who've left here. So in order to do that, we need new powers. Part of that is about, as I say, a new fiscal powers. And in order to get there, we need a new fiscal commission to look at not just our fiscal position as in how much we borrow or how much we spend and how much we tax, but across the range, the kinds of interventions we need to improve our economy and how we can change the way we spend money more generally. But a related point, and a really critical one that's going to come down the line at us, and it's related to this, is we need to properly understand how we're going to maximise the possible benefits of the access Northern Ireland will have to both the UK and EU markets via the Ireland Protocol. At the minute, it's very unclear. We've been talking repeatedly. We've been practically the only party who's been loud and public about our concerns around the end of the transition period coming later this year. We actually really need the UK government, the EU, and the government in Dublin to help us maximise the advantages that come from having preferential access to both markets. Brexit is a nightmare for our economy. It's a nightmare for our people. But if the protocol, which gives us preferential access to both markets, can be made to work in a way that gives our manufacturers and businesses, and therefore employees, here some advantage, then we need to understand that, and we need to understand that quickly. So that's a related point, and we need clarity about how all that's going to work, and that's related to the question of new powers.
Thank you, Matthew. That's a very good point at which to finish. Thanks to both of you, Matthew and Sinead. That's been really insightful. We've already had a lot of positive responses to the launch, and it's been well covered in newspapers and across social media. So thanks everyone for watching or listening to this, and please get in touch with us with any questions and comments. And we'll come back to the same subjects another time. Thank you.
Okay.